Welcome back to the Milk Production Podcast. Quick behind the scenes update. Editing on the prenatal breastfeeding preparation course is about 32% complete. Color grading and stock clips are keeping me plenty busy, but today we are diving into a topic that so many new parents find overwhelming. The first week of breastfeeding. What's normal and what isn't. And something I wish I had really internalized before I became a new parent is just how hard feeding on demand can be. After weeks of potentially poor sleep in that third trimester, then going through labor and delivery, you actually ride that post-birth high with a bit of energy until exhaustion catches up, right when your baby is feeding every 2 to 3 hours, and sometimes much more. My second baby nursed 15 times on day 2, and my third, 22 times in 24 hours on that second day. It was intense, but it was normal and it did get better. So let's walk through exactly what to expect. On day 1, we have the sleepy newborns. Many babies are very sleepy after birth, especially after long or medicated labors. You can imagine that you too will be sleepy after something as arduous as labor and delivery, and babies are engaged and involved in that process as well, and it's tough on them too. So they are very sleepy after birth. Regardless of the fact that they're little sleepyheads for that first day, we still expect to see 1 to 2 wet diapers and 1 to 2 meconium stools. Meconium stools are sort of a thicker, very dark stool that babies pass in the early days. That's actually kind of hard to wipe off, and it can feel like you're rubbing their poor skin off their bottoms. That gets better, but we do expect to see 1 to 2 of those in that first 24 hours. The colostrum volumes, the colostrum is the first milk that you're producing. The colostrum volumes are small, but they are sufficient. So often we get worried that because we don't have an abundant amount of colostrum or milk like we think we would early on, we are not meeting baby's demands. But in fact, the colostrum volumes that you produce in those early days are absolutely enough for baby. A typical feed for a newborn on the first day could be anywhere between 2 to 10 milliliters, and that small volume is enough for their blood sugar to keep them satisfied because they have those tiny little stomachs. The American Academy of Pediatrics does recommend initiating breastfeeding within the first hour, as do many other organizations like the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. The golden hour is such an amazing thing to be a part of, and just know that it can feel like you're venturing into something that you're not familiar with and that you're not practiced at yet as you're trying to get baby to latch for that first time in the golden hour. But when you do get baby latched, you are tapping into these reflexes that baby is innately born with and that are primed and ready to go right after delivery. And so that time that you have with baby to nurse helps set them on the path of knowing what to do when they come to the breast. Also, it can be incredibly encouraging to have that memory if you do enter a period where latching starts to become painful or challenging and you run into some bumps and hiccups along the way with breastfeeding. And if that's the case, you can look back to that time that you have in the golden hour as a reminder of what you and your baby are capable of, and that can just be very helpful to get through some of the more trying times. A note on circumcision. So circumcision sometimes happens in the first 24 hours or after, somewhere between 24 and 72 hours, depending on your preferences and your plans. If baby is circumcised, they may be extra sleepy afterward. And that can be difficult to try to wake baby up when they're in that very sleepy place. In addition to the fact that in the first 24 hours, they're very sleepy, recovering from labor and delivery already. Do continue to offer the breast frequently. Alternatively, babies may seek extra comfort through nursing and be very interested in feeding post-circumcision. So be mindful of that. Again, in the first 24 hours, and really for as long as baby's feeding on demand is recommended. But remember, at least every 2 to 3 hours we want to be offering, even if they're very sleepy and more challenging to wake up. Is it normal if your baby just sleeps through the first day? Yes. Most babies are very sleepy that first day, and 1 to 2 wets and meconium diapers are expected. But even if they're extra drowsy or have just had a circumcision, keep offering the breast on demand and at least every 2 to 3 hours. On day 2, we shift out of that very sleepy stage, and often we see baby become more alert. And then we enter a period of very frequent feeding. As I mentioned before, the second day for both my second and third kiddos was a lot of breastfeeding. And it's normal that we can expect 8 to 12 or more feeds in 24 hours, potentially with clustering. And those numbers that I gave you were for periods of cluster feeding where baby came off the breast because they thought they were done, and then we offered again very shortly thereafter, and that continued for some time. The second day can feel a little bit maddening at times, but it's really great for encouraging your supply to increase and come in higher volumes. So we shift hopefully out of that period of smaller volumes of colostrum into a period where we're transitioning into mature milk by doing these cluster feeds and doing these frequent feeds all throughout that second day. As a reminder, offer at least every 2 to 3 hours, but on-demand feeding is recommended. So if it's more frequently than every 2 hours, absolutely go ahead and give baby the breast whenever they're cueing. In terms of wet diapers and stools, we would expect to see at least 2 wet diapers and 1 to 2 stools. Those stools may be the same meconium color, but they may also be transitioning from a very dark meconium color that's difficult to wipe off to a little bit easier to wipe off, potentially still very dark, but like a greenish tint to it, like a spinachy green type color. The frequent feeding that happens on the second day supports milk production in the short term and in the long term. It is not a sign of low supply. Why does it feel like your baby wants to nurse nonstop on day 2? Because that's exactly what's normal. Babies often feed 8 to 12 times in 24 hours, sometimes even more. It does not mean you don't have enough milk. It's how your baby signals your body to make more. So going into the third day and really sort of thinking about days 3 to 5 as a similar time frame, your milk is increasing, coming in, and you may begin to experience engorgement. Lactogenesis 2 begins during this stage, and milk volume is rising. So we talked about those stools transitioning from that black, tarry texture to that more spinachy green color that's easier to wipe off. In this period between days 3 and 5, you should start to see mustardy yellow colored stools, often with white, kind of seedy looking bits in the stool, which is just undigested fat deposits. By day 4 to 5, we should be seeing 6 or more wet diapers a day. So potentially every time you go to feed, you're changing the diaper and you notice a wet diaper. So it could be 8 or even more. And we would aim to see 3 to 4 yellow stools daily. The yellow stools are a really good indication that mom's milk is increasing. It's getting into those intestines and has pushed all the meconium out, and we're now getting into the more mature milk stage, which is great. It can quell some of our concerns about whether our supply is coming in. So, for weight loss, most babies lose weight. Weight loss is expected. Now, I used to say all babies lose weight, but in my time working with newborns, I have, I think, 2 that have proven that statement wrong who did not lose weight. So not all babies lose weight, but most babies lose weight. It can be a little jarring to hear in the first week that your newborn is losing weight, especially coupled with any concerns you're having about your supply. So just knowing that that weight loss is expected and anticipated can be helpful in terms of preparing for this time. Weight loss less than or equal to 7% of their birth weight is completely expected. Weight loss greater than 10% of their birth weight does require evaluation. Now, you may often hear that 10% is sort of the line where we say, okay, now that baby's exceeded 10% of their birth weight in terms of weight loss, we need to start supplementing with formula. It is important to note that a 10% or more weight loss does not automatically trigger formula supplementation. We would need to look at the entire context of the baby and mom's experience. So for example, say by day 3, mom's milk is coming in and increasing and feeds are looking beautiful and we do a weighted feed and baby's transferring 1.5 ounces, 2 ounces, but we're at 10.5% weight loss. That might be because we lost a lot of weight in the first day, a little bit more on the second day, plateaued on the third day, and by day 4, we're going to be increasing again. This is a very common story. And because of that, we don't want to say that there's a hard and fast rule that at 10% baby requires supplementation. So that's the first thing. In addition to that, when we do see that we need to supplement baby, because weight loss is continuing or because we're reaching that greater than 10% threshold and we're not sure breastfeeding's going well, we're not sure about supply, the diaper counts maybe aren't enough or something like that, and we think that, okay, we need to go ahead and start supplementing, I would encourage you to be prepared to ask your practitioner if it's okay to supplement with your own expressed breast milk. In that way, you would offer baby the breast, pump after, and give baby your pumped breast milk, and that's called a triple feed plan. Now, let me be the first to tell you, I am not a fan of a triple feed plan, especially if you don't need it. So I would not jump to this right away just to make, to short things up. It can make you feel like a crazy person. Basically, all the time in between feeds evaporates. You never sleep. You barely eat. It's really tough. But again, it's a great 24-hour plan in the early days if we're concerned about weight loss and the conversation has turned towards supplementation and it looks like that may be something that we need to do. It's a good tool to have. The other thing you can do is make that plan more manageable by sometimes replacing an entire feed with a pumping session and then giving baby that pumped milk. Now, introducing bottles in the early days can lead to a flow preference, which deserves its own separate episode, but there absolutely are ways to continue to preserve your breastfeeding relationship if you do find yourself needing to supplement. The thing I want to foot stomp here without going too far down that rabbit hole is if the conversation turns to supplementation, first ask if you can come up with a feeding plan that incorporates removing your own milk to supplement with baby before we turn to formula. Further, if you find when you pump you're not getting enough, see if the hospital that you're at or anywhere in your area makes it so that you have access to donor milk. That's also an option. So some things to consider when we're talking about the normal or expected weight loss versus those that require some additional steps. Again, in this day 3 to 5 period, lots going on here. So for mom, engorgement is typically peaking during this window. So the breast may feel swollen, firm, or tender. Sometimes they can feel like as hard as your forehead, and you really want them to be softer, like as soft as your cheek. So when you think about that difference, it can kind of seem absolutely crazy that your breast would be as hard as your forehead. But in certain periods of engorgement, that absolutely can happen. And we do want to make sure that we get you to a more comfortable place. In that time, you may find it difficult to latch baby. However, frequent feeding at this time period is very helpful. So one of the things that you can do to get baby to latch when you are engorged is to hand express a little bit before you latch baby, or to do something called reverse pressure softening, which I think I talked about in another episode, but I'm going to go ahead and just give you a quick little reminder about it. So if you've got the areola and the nipple in the middle, then you take your fingers and you dabble around the areola and you just kind of press into the skin gently, no pain. The idea here is that you're pushing the fluid that's right behind the nipple back into the breast so that the baby has the space to really get a mouthful of the breast. When you're engorged, sometimes what happens there is the tissue right behind the nipple precludes baby from being able to get a big mouthful because it's not as compressible as it is when you're not engorged. So that reverse pressure softening can help, as can frequent feeding. You can do warm compresses or massage before the feed. That's going to be stimulating and get that milk flowing. But I would not do warm compresses in between feeds because, again, that's stimulating. And we don't want to stimulate and increase milk production in a period when you're already very engorged. Hand expression, again, you can use that to make it easier for baby to latch, but you can also use that between feeds. So sometimes what we find is now that your milk volume is higher, baby's going longer stretches between feeds, which is great. But what that means is your breasts are left not being emptied for those longer stretches. And in periods of engorgement, that can be quite uncomfortable. So a little hand expression could go a long way here for you. Hand express a little bit to the point of comfort such that you're not telling your body to make a significant amount of milk more than what baby needs, because that could lead to an oversupply. But hand expressing just a little bit to get to the point of comfort could help you get to the period where you're going to feed baby again at the 2 to 3 hour mark. Again, cold compresses are great. Ice on the breast, bags of frozen peas, they, sort of shape to the breast very easily, something like that. Just make sure that you put a barrier between your skin and the ice to make sure you're not getting any cold burns. Now, you can also wear a supportive bra during that period, but a note on supportive bras. When you are wearing a bra, this is true for engorgement and really for the entire time you're nursing, you want to make sure it's not restrictive. So supportive should feel comfortable, like it helps your breasts feel more comfortable as you're sort of moving about your day. However, it should not feel like, it's pressing up against a certain part of your breast or something like that. This is particularly important when you are engorged because what we're looking for is the breast to be as emptied as possible. And if there is any compression up against the breast from a particularly restrictive bra, it could decrease the ability for baby to fully empty the breast during a breastfeed. And then what ends up happening is you can get a spot that's not emptied and then you can get a clogged duct and it can lead to all sorts of other fun. So make sure that the bra that you're wearing is supportive, though not restrictive. How do you know your milk is coming in? And what about breast swelling? By days 3 to 5, heavier diapers, stools turning yellow, and breast fullness or engorgement are signs your milk is in. Feed often. Soften with massage or warmth before nursing, and use cold compresses or ibuprofen if you're able afterward for comfort. Day 5 is a great place to pause for a bit of a checkpoint. We should see supply stabilizing, feeds stretching, so the time in between the feeds stretching a bit. You feed baby, they fill up, and maybe they go a full 2 to 3 hours. Maybe less cluster feeding because they're really filling from each feed. And diaper counts and stool color remain the best markers of adequate breastfeeding. What's the milestone to check by day 5? 6 wet diapers and 3 to 4 yellow stools in 24 hours. That's the clearest sign breastfeeding is on track. Beyond the first week, between days 10 and 14, we expect babies will regain their birth weight. By 2 weeks, most babies should be back to or above their birth weight. Feedings become more efficient, babies become more effective at removing milk from the breast, and sleep and wake cycles begin to settle. When should your baby be back to birth weight? By 2 weeks at the latest. If your baby hasn't regained birth weight by then, it's time to check in with your pediatrician and an IBCLC. When is it time to call your pediatrician or IBCLC for help? Reach out right away if your baby isn't peeing at least 6 times a day by day 5, if stools haven't turned yellow, or if your baby is too sleepy to feed well. It's also a red flag if weight loss is greater than 10%, or if you're experiencing severe nipple pain or damage. The first week of breastfeeding can feel all-consuming, even overwhelming. Sleepy starts, constant feeding, maybe even engorgement. But most of it is normal. The key is knowing what patterns to expect and which red flags mean it's time to get help. My prenatal breastfeeding preparation course isn't available yet, but I'll let you know as soon as it's ready. In the meantime, follow along on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Milk Production for updates, clips, and more support during those early days. Thanks for joining today, and remember, you can find show notes and the show itself at themilkproduction.com or listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Milk Production.